The Israeli military have so far, since the ground offensive begun, struck 2,500 Hamas targets, which is clearly an extraordinary number if you think about it. How do you think they're actually progressing?
Yeah, good afternoon, Simon. I mean, away from the headline news about the humanitarian situation, the hostage situation and the huge diplomatic efforts by Antony Blinken in the region, the IDF's main effort is clearly the ground offensive, and that's what's going on apace. They claim they've had, in the last 24 hours, close-quarter fighting with Hamas fighters. They've also been continuing the bombing campaign, which, of course, has struck war depots, observation points, command posts, and they said overnight it also struck a Hamas military compound as well. And as you say, 2,500 Hamas targets. That's a hell of a lot of targets for a relatively small area. From a Hamas perspective, they clearly are no match for the armour of the Israeli Defence Force, particularly in this semi-urban environment. So they've been resorting to tactics of setting traps, IEDs, popping out of their tunnels with hit-and-run tactics, some video footage shown here. But they've also said that they're not really focused on defending the outskirts, particularly to the north of the city. And eventually they will be preparing for the next phase, which is when the IDF have to actually go into the city, which will very much more favour Hamas's defence. OK,
we're going to switch now and take a look at the other conflict, of course, going on in Europe, which is Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen's been visiting Kyiv. She's pledged to continue with financial aid, which is always, of course, a concern. The United States has also announced a new weapons package for the country, alongside Israel, I believe. So how do you think President Zelensky's office will receive this?
Well, it's been an interesting visit by all accounts. As you say, Ursula von der Leyen was the main purpose of this is about Ukraine's accession to the EU, but inevitably they also discussed aid as well. And of course, aid, particularly military aid, is a vital component of Ukraine's defences. But there's general war weariness in the West, and of course there's increasing international concern that the war is ground to a halt and that actually that might lead to some sort of negotiation. Well, President Zelensky took the press conference, used it as an opportunity to make absolutely clear that Ukraine was not ready to stop hostilities. And besides, President Putin was almost certainly not going to be prepared to negotiate until after the US presidential elections, because if there is a change in administration, that may well change the level of support for Ukraine, and that will be something Russia would capitalise upon.
OK, so beyond all of this, what is actually happening on the ground in Ukraine at the moment?
Yeah, with the limited time available, there's three main areas that of fighting. Avdiivka, which is across to the east here. This is all part of the battle for Bakhmut. The Russia are using what they call Storm Z troops in a meat assault, and it really is just a meat grinder. They're throwing troops over open ground, suffering 40 to 70% casualties. It's absolutely brutal, and the Ministry of Defence has said that over the course of the war so far, they believe Russia's lost 300,000 casualties, 100,000 deaths. And if you look at that in context, that's 200 times the number of casualties we suffered in the whole of the Afghanistan conflict. The other area of the conflict is just east of Zaporizhzhia, just in this area down here, the salient. This is where Ukrainian forces are trying to break through those three layers of Russian defences. They've got about 15 kilometres through, but haven't made a complete breakthrough to try and get through to the coast. And of course, now that the winter rains have arrived, it's an absolute mud bath there, and it'll be later in November, early December before it freezes over. And the third area is across to the Dnipro River, just south of Zaporizhzhia. The Ukrainians have made a foothold across there. If they are able to substantiate that, that's behind the Russian defensive lines, and that could prove significant. But once again, until the weather freezes over, the weather freezes the ground, it'll be very difficult. So despite the media attention being on Israel at the moment, Ukraine's war for national survival continues apace, and there looks to be no prospect in the near term of either side negotiating some sort of peaceful settlement.